1 Kings 19. You ever have one of those moments, you have those times, or maybe you go through a phase where you just think, that's it, I'm done. I quit. I can't take any more of this. And you just feel worn out. When you go through one of those phases, what I want you to understand is you are totally, perfectly normal. Some of the greatest biblical heroes went through the exact same thing. So 1 Kings 19:2, Jezebel is out to get Elijah. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and even more if I do not make your life as one of them by tomorrow about this time. And he was afraid, and he arose and he ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, came and sat down under a juniper tree, and requested for himself that he might die, and said, it is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I'm not better than my fathers. Now here's a hero who has just called down fire from heaven and had an awesome, indescribable victory. And Jezebel, of course, upset about it. And he's running, and he's discouraged. Go over to Jeremiah chapter 20. Jeremiah has his own struggle also. Jeremiah 20, verse 7 through 9. Now, Jeremiah is a little bit different. This is his complaint. Lord, you have deceived me. I want you to pause right there a second. Jeremiah is God's prophet. He's been doing God's work. And now he says, Lord, you deceived me, and I was deceived. You have overcome me and prevailed. I have become a laughingstock all day long. Everyone mocks me. For each time I speak, I cry aloud, I proclaim violence and destruction, because for me the word of the Lord has resulted in reproach and derision all day long. If I say I will not remember him or speak any more in his name, then in my heart it becomes like a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I'm weary of holding it in. I cannot endure it. Now he's in one of those places. He's like, be going over to John chapter 6. He's like, I'm just going to quit. And then he found out he couldn't. And then in John 6, we don't think of Christ as being discouraged, but most people would put this in that type of a context. And this, let me click up ahead here. John 6 and 66. So he's been teaching to the people. He did the miracle of feeding the 5,000. The next day they come back and they want another free meal. Christ is not going to play along with their selfish, fleshly agenda. And so he delivers them a sermon about having to drink his blood and eat his flesh, to which they go, this guy's nuts. We can't hang around with him. And as a result of his teaching, as a result of him offending them with his message, many of his disciples withdrew and walked with him no more. And he said to the 12, do you want to go away also? Of course, Simon Peter answered something wise. Where else would we go? Now, most people look at this and see this as a time where Christ was a little disappointed, discouraged. We know he was angry at times at different people. And the point that we're making with these three examples is feeling discouraged in the face of disappointing results or opposition or whatever's going on in life. That's just the common experience of life. If anyone thinks they're going to walk through life and everything's just going to be joyful and happy all the time, then they're naive. The fact of the matter is, if you're going to walk the straight and narrow road, the devil is going to try to beat you down and beat you off of that straight and narrow road. Oddly enough, if you're on the broad road, he's going to try to drive you deeper into it. You don't get away from the realities of life. This is just the way it works. So when you do go through them and you do face them, understand it's not the end. It's just a moment. Well, think back. Think back to the different moments of disappointment that you've had in life. Those times where you felt discouraged and all of the times that you wanted to quit. And if you've got 20, 30, 50, 60 years and you think about it, you can come up with a lot of them. I want you also to think some of those earlier moments when you felt discouraged and wanted to quit, let's say when you were 16 or maybe 22. How serious do they look now? You look back on some of those and kind of go, well, that was silly of me. It's okay. That's just where we were in the journey. So what I'm going to tell you to do is when you feel those times, allow yourself to feel it. You are human. And humans feel these things, whether you're Elijah or Jeremiah or Christ in the flesh or just us regular old people. You're going to feel them from time to time. So don't quit. Don't get all upset. What you do is you look up because you know your story's not over yet. And that's the place you want to focus. There's more to come. So we go through our season. It's kind of like going through a dry land sometimes. And we're going to talk about Barnabas in this lesson because he's a guy who left an awesome legacy. And I say it's an awesome legacy because here we are nearly 2,000 years later, and everybody still knows, well, if you're a biblical student, everybody still knows about Barnabas and the things he did. And he did some wonderful things. Now, this is just kind of a preview. We'll get into his generosity in Acts 4:36, where he sold his land and he gave it and laid it at the apostles' feet, which was quite impressive. We're going to talk about how he reached out to the difficult. That's going to be in Acts 9, later on in 15 also, where he reached out to Saul of Tarsus shortly after his conversion and brought Saul into the Christian community. And so because of him, Paul becomes an apostle that we all revere today. We'll talk a little bit about John Mark in Acts 15 and how Barnabas stood up for John Mark when John Mark had been disappointing in his past. And this next, I've just got to share this with you. We don't know this for a fact, so the Bible never says what I'm getting ready to tell you verbatim. It has been a long-held tradition that John Mark is the author of the Gospel of Mark. Now, some of the authorships we're not real clear on anyway, but that has been the long-held tradition. And I just think it adds a neat little flavor if you like that long-held tradition, that had Barnabas not stood up for this man, I wonder what we would have. Don't know. We're just speculating there. So Barnabas saw John Mark's potential, which is great. That's what we do. So what we want to do is we want to look at Barnabas, and we just want to imitate him in the ordinary moments of life. Later on, we'll have Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, everything you do, do it as though you're doing it for the Lord. So number one, Barnabas just followed Jesus. He wasn't spectacular. Barnabas did not do miracles. Remember, Paul did miracles, and they were such extreme miracles that they call them unusual there in Acts 19. We don't have any recorded miracles of Barnabas. All we have recorded of Barnabas is really a little bit, but it's neat that it lasted 2,000 years. He reached out to Saul of Tarsus. He reached it up from John Mark, and he sold a piece of land and gave the money to the apostles. That was it. He was an ordinary guy doing ordinary things. He didn't do anything that you and I cannot do to this very day. And we'll talk about selling some land, and we'll use that as an analogy later on in the lesson. But all of us can stand up for somebody who's being unfairly rejected. It's nothing outside of our abilities. So he simply followed Jesus. He acted on it. He didn't just sit around and nod in agreement. You know, a lot of people like to do that. They like to sit in a sermon, nod in agreement. One of my favorite stories is the guy that every time I preach on being a responsible husband, he would always say, "Man, you stepped on my toes." But he never changed. But he thought he did something because he agreed with the sermon. I'm like, no, it's got to go a little deeper than that. But anyway. So Christ says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Do not do the things that I say," in Luke 6:46. Barnabas was one of those guys who did the things Jesus said. And again, not big, phenomenal, outrageous things. He just went out and helped folks that needed some encouragement. And if you will look, there are people in our lives, every single one of us, there are people who need encouragement. When we talk about restoring New Testament Christianity, it is more than getting rid of the piano. Okay, get rid of that piano. I agree with that 100%. Got to have the Lord's Supper every Sunday. I agree with that 100%. The church is not a recreation institute. I agree with that 100%. And so we tend to, if we're not careful, we'll cherry pick those things that are correct and are comfortable to us, and that's all good, but leave off some other things. And we may find ourselves under the criticism where he said to the Pharisees, "You tithe of mint, anise, and cumin, but you leave off the weightier matters." And the second greatest law, according to Christ, was that you love your neighbor as yourself. And love, of course, encompasses many, many different things. And one of the things that encompasses is encouraging those who need encouragement. And that's all Barnabas did. So it's not going to require some grand, big gestures, just practical acts to help other people get closer to God. That's really all we're talking about, that encouragement. When they feel overwhelmed, we're going to help them get through it one step at a time, 1 minute at a time, if we have to. So case by case basis, of course, Christianity is messy in practice. There's just no way around that. That's one of the things that's difficult. Satan has managed to sell the broader religious community that Christianity must be pleasant and sweet and feel like a warm hug all of the time. I have an idea when Peter preached on the day of Pentecost and told the people they crucified the Son of God and they were pierced to the heart. That didn't feel like a warm hug and pleasant and sweet. Now, there's times for those things, and there's nothing wrong with those things. The thing is, Christianity is messy. We're dealing with messy people. You can't just put it into a simple cookie cutter thing and go, well, this is the way it's going to be all the time. No, you deal with some tough people, and Barnabas dealt with some tough people. He had to. He went to Antioch, he crossed cultural lines and dealt with some things that did not fit with Judaism. Job 15:6, this is the reason it's kind of messy to deal with. People. So it says, how much less one who is detestable and corrupt, man who drinks injustice like water. Now, who are we dealing with? We're dealing with people who your version may say drinks iniquity like water. And that makes it tough. But that doesn't stop us from going out and encouraging those people to move on to higher ground. So I was trying to think, how do we do this? Because when he says man drinks iniquity like water, that's us. That's you and me. But I know what we do because that's not something I really want to admit. And so what we do is we go, well, no, I know there's some really bad people down in the bad parts of town, and they're doing some really ugly stuff. Now, me, and I was thinking this morning, I just thought of this analogy this morning as I was reviewing my notes. I said, I think this is kind of like comparing drinking Coke to Sprite. So look at Coke and it's dark, right? You can't see through it. It's murky, if you would. And you go, yeah, that can represent iniquity. Now, I'm going to make it Diet Dr. Pepper, but anyway, we'll just say Coke. And then comes along somebody and says, well, I'm better than you. I drink Sprite. It's clear, it's clean, you can see straight through it. There's just no impurities in it. No, they're both junk food. They're both trash. That's all you got. And I'm not trying to take your Coke or Sprite away from you. I like mine too. But, so many times we've got our cup of iniquity over here, but since the way I choose to sin is different than the way somebody else sins, I describe theirs as dark, ugly. Mine's clear as pure spring water. No, we all drink iniquity. That's what we do. That's why it can be kind of messy sometimes. And it is not a simple cookie cutter thing because people are involved in a multitude of different situations. And so what we do is we go out and we challenge the status quo. We challenge those who are in opposition to the teaching of the Bible. And yet at the same time, we comfort those who need comforted. Or as Galatians 6:10 would say, we do good unto all men, especially the household of faith. And that varies on a case-by-case basis how you approach it and who you approach it. You look at the case in front of you instead of trying to run by some, as I call it up here, a cookie-cutter thing. So what Barnabas did was he reached out to Saul of Tarsus, somebody who was considered untouchable, somebody who after the stories of his conversion got around, people sat around the table going, he's got way too much baggage, this ain't ever going to work. Ain't anybody ever going to accept that man. He just needs to go back home and mind his own business. People said things like that. And when Barnabas packed his bags and said, I'm going to go bring him in, there's some people that criticized him and thought he was nuts out of his rocker and that he was getting ready to get in prison and thrown away and all kinds of stuff because they just didn't trust him. It was not all this beautiful, sweet, romantic, thing that we would portray it if we were doing a Hollywood kind of movie. And then years later, he stood toe to toe with Paul over John Mark because he disagreed with him. And we don't have all the details of how that discussion went, but if humanity is humanity, two men going toe to toe can get what we would consider in our soft society pretty rough. And given the way the Jewish society could be very outspoken and very emotional in their outspokenness, I have an idea we might have called that a very energetic conversation that they had. And yet Barnabas, the son of encouragement, he stood up. So fighting the good fight is not always easy, and yet this is what we have been called to do. And that is one of the things that Barnabas demonstrates. And yet, even though he was an awesome soldier, left us a 2,000-year legacy, he's known for his encouragement, for his ability to stand behind people and draw them nearer to God. So he did some land selling. You say, okay, why did he do it? Well, it's not because everybody deserved the stuff that he did. I think he was investing in something bigger than himself. He knew he was a part of something that was going to really, I'm going to say, expand the globe and do some things. And so he sold his land. Now, he sold some literal land. We're going to sell some land too, but it's going to be a little different. We're going to sell our time and encouraging and helping and supporting and teaching. We're going to sell our talent. We're going to sell our focus. We're going to give up some comfort, which is something that's a little hard to convey. But when Barnabas went off and did the things he did, he didn't hop in his Cadillac, put in his favorite music, streaming whatever on Sirius, and drive down the 4-lane interstate, stop at Buc-ee's and get him a soda pop on the way. He probably walked. And most of us don't like even walking through Super Walmart. And he walked at best. You go, well, maybe he rode a donkey. Okay. Let's play this one through a minute. How long you want to sit in a saddle without air conditioning and the hope of a Buc-ee's and one of their big half-pound barbecue sandwiches up the road? Yeah. Barnabas wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't looking to become famous. He was just about living Christianity. He heard the sermons, they sang their songs, and he said, okay, worship service is over. It's time to get to work. And he got to work as a son of encouragement. The problem we face today is too many people think, I sat through the sermon, I endured that. Whoa, I didn't think the preacher would ever hush. Well, I made a sacrifice today. Now I get 6 days off. I'll do it again next Sunday. Barnabas and Saul of Tarsus. Let's go to Acts 9. Acts 9:26. Starting verse 26. When he, as Paul, came to Jerusalem, he was trying to associate with the disciples, but they were afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took hold of him and brought him to the apostles and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road and how he had talked to him and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. Now there's some courage because right at the end of verse 26, we're really not sure he's converted. And if he's not really converted, if it is a trap, you're done for. Barnabas stood up. He moved with courage. He put his neck on the line. He stood out there. He took some risk because he saw something. Now, what? We don't know exactly, but for some reason, he was encouraged. He was enthusiastic about it. And so you had your negative complainers. You know they were there. And you got Barnabas. Okay, how many of the negative complainers can you name by name? I know some disciples. Who can you name by name? The one that stood up. Hmm. Interesting thing to think about. So what if Barnabas had listened to the fearful and sat down? Now I'm of the opinion that God would have got Paul in somehow. I just don't know how. It'd have been a different story in the Bible. It wouldn't have been Barnabas. But Barnabas, he's the one. He was the operative, if you would, and he did what he was supposed to do because he knew he wasn't called to just sit comfortably and do nothing and stay in his comfort zone. And we're not. We're not called to sit in the dugout, sit on the bench, or what you want to call it. We're called to fight the good fight, 1 Timothy 6:12. And that's one of the things that scares most people to death. Because when you do stand up and fight the good fight, there are going to be negative complainers. There's going to be people telling you you're wasting your time and you're doing it all wrong and what have you. And Barnabas had to find his, I'm going to call it centeredness, to say, no, this is what I need to do. This is where I need to go. And so he goes to Antioch. Let's go over to Acts chapter 11, verse 22. So he heads off to Antioch. News about them reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas off to Antioch. And when he arrived, he witnessed the grace of God. He rejoiced with them, began to encourage them with a resolute heart to remain true to the Lord. So he goes outside of his culture, and you have to understand Jewish culture. When we talk about that, it was vehement. Remember when Peter went to Cornelius, and then there was the baptism, and then when he came back to Jerusalem, they called him on the carpet. And they wanted to know, why are you dealing with the Gentiles? We don't do that. And Peter had to defend himself for having gone to. Now, you and I, we cross these lines all the time. We like, what are you talking about? No. And when Barnabas crossed that same line, he became the focus of criticism to some of those vehement Judaism people who wanted to be Christian but didn't really know what to do with the Gentiles or how they were going to fit in. But when he went, he didn't make excuses. He didn't hesitate. He didn't try to put it off on somebody else. He just gave himself. He went. That's what he did. He just said, somebody needs to go. I'm available. I'm going to go. Come down to verse 25, maybe through verse 26. And then he left Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. And for an entire year, they met with the church and taught considerable numbers. And the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. So apparently, no, we're kind of guessing here, but apparently the work was so big, he needed some help. And so he reached out to Paul for help. He didn't say, no, this is my work. I can't share my pulpit with anybody. He said, no, let's get Paul in here. We can do some stuff. And so we're going to have our Antiochs also. And it could be at our job, our school, our neighborhood. You'll have to decide where your symbolic Antioch is. And we're going to go there. And we're going to do the best we can. We're going to be a son of encouragement and deal with each thing on a case-by-case basis. So Barnabas brought people to Christ. He encouraged spiritual success. He understood Acts 17:30, where God commands all men everywhere to repent. This is what we do. He understood Matthew 25:31 through 46. Now, we're not going to read that right now, but that's where he says there's going to be a judgment. The angels are going to come. They're going to divide the sheep from the goats. And the sheep get to go to heaven, and the goats go into eternal run. He understood these teachings, and he went and taught these people. He didn't coddle them. He didn't pamper them. He didn't pretend everything was fine with them. He knew that God could redeem anyone who was penitent. And let me say that again. God can redeem anyone who is penitent. Anybody who says, I want out of that sin, the blood of Christ can take care of that. But it takes us that willingness to acknowledge the sin we're in. As long as we're in denial, we got nothing. We got no recourse there. So he saw the potential in people. And then we come to John Mark. Now, if you look at Acts 13 and 13, let me get the page right there. Now, Paul and his companions put out to sea from Paphos, and they came to Pergamum and Pamphylia, but John left them and returned to Jerusalem. Now we don't know all the whats, but we do know Paul was not happy that John Mark had left them there. So if you'll turn over to Acts 15 and verse 37, Barnabas wanted to take John, called Mark, along with them, but Paul kept insisting that they should not take him along, who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there occurred such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another, and Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. Barnabas took an uncomfortable stand. He wasn't afraid to take a stand. Now, he's a son of encouragement. He is known for his encouraging personality. He was encouraging even when he was taking a stand. He was encouraging John Mark. God forgives the penitent, and he does. And I think Barnabas understood that. Barnabas practiced Matthew 18:21. Now that's where Peter came and said, how many times should I forgive my brother? Up to 7 times a day. He thought he's been really generous. And that's where Christ said, how about 70 times 7? I think Barnabas got that. He knew that a second chance could empower the willing. And if this John Mark is the same authorship as the Gospel of Mark, I'm glad Barnabas gave him a second chance. So now what we do is we look around and go, who needs a second chance? Who's been having trouble? Who's been struggling? Who needs to leave a sin behind? How can I encourage them to leave that sin behind? I want to make this very clear. Being a son of encouragement does not mean pampering somebody while they are in their sin and making them feel okay about their sin. Being a son of encouragement is encouraging people to leave their foolish ideas behind and stand more squarely with God. That's the encouragement we're called to offer. So as you look at the whole picture, we'll start to wind it up. Barnabas is not a license to sin. He's not a license for permissiveness, and that is one of the things that has invaded the modern religious community. I tell you, you've got to give Satan points. If you talk about diabolical genius, it just blows my mind today. So I'm looking at my clock so I don't go too long. Let me do a brief recap. Back when I was in the 1960s growing up Southern Baptist, had I gone and talked to a Catholic about morals, now we didn't like the Catholics, we were pretty clear about that, but had we gone and talked about morals, we would have found that as we talked about the 7 deadly sins and the things that fall under those 7 main categories, we would have been in agreement. We would have disagreed big time about the Pope and all that stuff, But when we looked at morals, we would have said, yeah, that's right. When we go over to the Assembly of God, that was my grandma's church. And we talked about, speaking in tongues, not speaking in tongues. Well, I was Southern Baptist. We wasn't going to raise hands and speak in tongues. It just didn't go that direction. But if we talked about morals, we were on the same page. We had disagreements, but we had a moral agreement. Had I gone down to the Methodist church or the Presbyterian church, we'd have had different doctrinal ideas on some things, but morally, we would have been in the same place. Can we say that today? Not at all. You can see a big cross on a building and message about Christ dying, and you can find all kinds of wickedness on the inside of that. That's not what we're here to encourage. This is not a license to approve sin. When we say son of encouragement, yes. And the encouragement is to draw near and near to God, to wash your hands, your sinners, and come out of the world. Love doesn't blur the lines. It doesn't minimize the lines. Yes, it's encouraging. Sometimes the encouragement is interesting. And those of you who remember Mama's belt or paddle or whatever her favorite weapon was know exactly what I'm talking about. Or 2 Thessalonians 3:10, there are some hard lines. Paul taught, if man won't work, neither shall he eat. Brethren, that's a hard line right there. Bible compassion, the encouragement of Barnabas lifts people up towards God. That's what we do. John 8:11, one of the very compassionate, absolutely. When the woman caught in adultery, and he says, go. From now on, do not sin any longer. He didn't confirm her in their sin. He didn't endorse her sin. He told her to come out of her sin. and her sin had been clearly identified in that context. So sadly, modern religion embraces too much shallowness in the name of being kind or being polite or being pleasant or being a son of encouragement. It's deeper. Unless you repent, you will likewise perish. And a religion that just makes people comfortable in their sin and does not call them to repentance is not kind. It is not polite. And it is not pleasant. And for all eternity, those who drank the Kool-Aid will know that it was not kind, polite, or encouraging. So what made Barnabas? He walked with Jesus. He didn't seek personal recognition. He wasn't out to make a name for himself. I have an idea if we could talk to him today, 2,000 years later, he'd be surprised we took any note of him. He knew sinners could repent, and they can. Anyone that wants to. And so he pointed people to draw nearer to God. That was the encouragement. And that's what we do. So it's not that complicated. Last slide, obviously. Take up your cross. Lead others to God. And encourage the penitent. And when we do that, we'll be living very much the spirit of Barnabas. And that will just be great. So we're getting ready to sing 294, Jesus is Calling. I have an idea most of us have heard that calling. But if you're not, and it's time to make a change, if we can help you in a public way, let us do so while we stand and sing.